How to overcome an avoidant relationship trauma. This isn't something you just get over with time or by dating other people. Being with an avoidant changes how you think about love in ways that regular breakups don't. It teaches you to expect people to pull away when you try to get close, to interpret silence as rejection, and to question your own gut feelings because you spent months trying to make sense of someone who was completely unpredictable. The damage happens because your brain was constantly trying to solve a puzzle that had no solution. Why did they pull away when things got good? Why did they seem so into you one day and cold the next? Why did your attempts to connect make them more distant? You kept looking for patterns that would help you predict their behavior, but avoidants operate from internal mess that has nothing to do with what you did. This creates a specific type of damage where you lose trust in your ability to read people and situations. You start believing that love means accepting inconsistent treatment, that stable relationships are boring, and that if someone is too available or reliable, something must be wrong with them. Getting over this isn't about learning to be more patient with people who can't show up consistently. It's about unlearning the survival habits you developed to cope with someone who treated your love like a threat. It's about rebuilding your ability to recognize and accept consistent love without getting suspicious or anxious about it. The first thing you need to do is accept that the confusion you're feeling is completely valid. You're not crazy for being confused by someone who said one thing and did another consistently. You're not overthinking for trying to understand behavior that genuinely made no sense. Their inconsistency wasn't a puzzle for you to solve. It was dysfunction that had nothing to do with your worth or your actions. Here's how to actually stop the mental loop of trying to figure them out. Every time you catch yourself analyzing their behavior or trying to decode their mixed signals, redirect that energy into something concrete. Write down 3 facts about their actions without trying to explain why they did them. For example, they cancelled plans Tuesday. They didn't respond to my text for 2 days. They seemed distant during our last conversation. Stop there. Don't add interpretations or explanations. When your brain starts creating stories about their motivations, interrupt the pattern by asking yourself, what would I tell a friend if their partner acted this way? This creates emotional distance and helps you see the situation more objectively. Practice saying out loud, I don't need to understand their behavior to know it wasn't acceptable. Set a timer for 5 minutes when you catch yourself obsessing over their actions. Allow yourself exactly 5 minutes to think about it. Then deliberately move your attention to something that requires focus, a workout, a work project, calling a friend. This trains your brain that you control when and how long you think about them, not the other way around. Most people want to rush through this phase and jump straight to feeling better, but you can't heal from something you don't fully acknowledge happened. Avoidant relationship trauma is real, and it's different from regular heartbreak because it attacks your ability to trust your own perceptions. When someone's words and actions consistently don't match, when they create intimacy and then punish you for responding to it, when they make you feel like you're asking for too much when you're asking for basic connection, that's not normal relationship conflict. That's psychological manipulation, even if it wasn't intentional. You need to stop trying to make their behavior make sense and start accepting that some people operate from such internal conflict that their actions toward you will never follow logical patterns. Their hot and cold behavior wasn't about testing you or your relationship. It was about their own inability to handle intimacy consistently. Once you've accepted that the confusion was real and justified, you'll probably start feeling angry. This anger is actually crucial for your recovery, even though it might feel uncomfortable or wrong. You might feel angry about the time you wasted trying to decode their mixed signals. You might feel furious about the energy you spent managing their moods while neglecting your own needs. You might feel rage about how you started doubting your own perceptions and instincts. Instead of pushing down this anger, here's how to process it constructively. Write angry letters that you'll never send. Let yourself vent completely on paper without editing or censoring yourself. Include everything. What they did, how it made you feel, what you wish you could say to them. After writing, either tear up the letter or delete the document. The goal is release, not revenge. Use physical movement to process angry energy. When you feel that rage building up, Go for a run, hit a punching bag, do jumping jacks, or clean your house aggressively. Physical movement helps your body metabolize the stress hormones that anger creates and prevents the emotion from getting stuck in your system. Talk to yourself the way you'd talk to your best friend who was betrayed. Say things like, "You have every right to be angry. What they did was wrong. Your feelings are completely justified. This validates your experience instead of making you feel guilty for having normal reactions to abnormal treatment." Create a reality checklist of their specific behaviors that hurt you. Write down concrete actions, not feelings or interpretations. When you start to miss them or doubt whether your anger is justified, read this list to remind yourself why you have every right to feel upset. This anger isn't something to push down or feel guilty about. It's your self-worth fighting its way back to the surface after being buried under months of accepting treatment that wasn't acceptable. Your anger is information. It's telling you that something was wrong and that you deserved better than what you received. But you don't want to stay in anger forever, and you definitely don't want to use it to try to get revenge or make them understand what they did wrong. The anger is fuel to propel you away from dynamics that required you to minimize yourself, not fuel to try to change someone who showed you repeatedly that they can't meet your needs. After anger comes something even harder, grief. Not just grief about losing them, but grief about losing the version of yourself that existed before this experience changed you. This is often the longest and most difficult part of recovery because you're mourning multiple losses at once. Here's how to actively work through this grief instead of just enduring it. Schedule specific times to grieve, maybe 20 minutes every few days where you allow yourself to feel sad without trying to fix it or move past it. Set a timer and let yourself cry, look at old photos, or just sit with the sadness. When the timer goes off, return to your normal activities. Write a goodbye letter to your former self, the person who trusted easily, who didn't know that some people create intimacy just to withdraw from it, who believed that loving someone fully was always safe. Thank this version of yourself for their openness while acknowledging that you can't go back to being that naive about relationships. Create rituals that mark your transition from who you were to who you're becoming. This could be donating clothes that remind you of them, rearranging your living space, or starting a new hobby that represents your independence. Physical changes in your environment help your brain process that things are different now. Allow yourself to feel sad about the relationship you thought you had, while also acknowledging that the relationship you actually had wasn't sustainable or healthy. You can grieve the potential that never materialized while also accepting that the potential was probably never real to begin with. You're grieving the innocence you had about relationships before you learned that some people create intimacy specifically to withdraw from it. You're mourning the trust you used to have in your ability to read people accurately. You're saying goodbye to the part of yourself that could love openly without constantly scanning for signs of withdrawal or rejection. This grief is complicated because you can't go back to approaching relationships the way you did before. You now know things about emotional unavailability and attachment dysfunction that you can't unknow. You're becoming someone who can spot these patterns earlier, someone who has stronger boundaries around consistency, someone who won't accept breadcrumbs while hoping for a full meal. But becoming this new version of yourself requires grieving who you used to be, even if who you're becoming is ultimately healthier and more protected. You have to mourn the loss of your previous understanding of how love works while building a new understanding based on what you've learned. As you work through the grief, you'll start to gain perspective on what actually happened in the relationship. You'll begin to see their behavior patterns more clearly and see that their push-pull dynamic was about their internal conflict between wanting connection and fearing vulnerability. You'll realize that your responses to their inconsistency were normal reactions to abnormal behavior. This brings relief because you can finally see that their inability to love consistently wasn't about your lovability. It also brings sadness because you can see how trapped they were in patterns that prevented them from building the kind of connection they probably wanted on some level. But perspective doesn't mean you have to forgive them or excuse behavior that was harmful. You can see why someone acts the way they do while still maintaining that their behavior was unacceptable and damaging. Compassion for their limitations doesn't require you to tolerate dysfunction. The hardest part of recovery comes when you start trying to trust your instincts again and rebuild your capacity for healthy relationships. After months or years of having your perceptions challenged and your needs minimized, it takes time to remember what normal relationship behavior feels like. Here's how to actively rebuild your ability to trust yourself. Start keeping a daily journal where you write down your gut reactions to people and situations, then note whether those instincts turned out to be accurate. This creates evidence that your perceptions are reliable and worth trusting. Practice stating your needs clearly in low-stakes situations. If a friend asks what you want to do, give a direct answer instead of saying, "I don't care," or "whatever you want." If someone asks your opinion, share it honestly instead of trying to figure out what they want to hear. These small acts of authenticity rebuild your confidence in your own voice. When you catch yourself doubting your perceptions about someone's behavior, write down what you observed versus what they told you. For example, they said they were excited to see me, but they spent the whole evening looking at their phone and giving short answers. Trust what you saw, not what you were told. Set boundaries with people who make you feel like you're asking for too much when you express normal needs. Practice saying things like, "I need clear communication," or "I don't accept last-minute cancellations," and notice how different people respond. Healthy people will respect your boundaries. Unhealthy people will push back. You might find yourself suspicious of people who are consistent because consistency feels boring or fake after the intensity of dysfunction. You might interpret healthy communication as too much pressure because you're used to people who couldn't handle normal relationship conversations. You might feel uncomfortable with people who don't create drama because chaos started to feel like passion. When someone shows interest in your life, practice sharing instead of immediately wondering if you're being too much. When someone follows through on their promises, practice appreciating it instead of waiting for the other shoe to drop. When someone communicates directly, practice receiving it at face value instead of looking for hidden meanings. Create a list of what healthy relationship behavior actually looks like. Include things like consistent communication, following through on plans, being interested in your life, handling conflict respectfully, showing affection without strings attached. Refer to this list when you're confused about whether someone's treatment of you is normal. Recovery also means developing emotional immunity, the ability to recognize dysfunction quickly without becoming cynical about love itself. You want to maintain your capacity for connection while protecting yourself from patterns you now know are unsustainable. This doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without conscious effort. You have to actively practice new responses until they become natural. You have to challenge thoughts that assume the worst about people's intentions. You have to remind yourself that not everyone operates from the same emotional limitations as your avoidant ex. You'll probably have setbacks where you find yourself falling into old patterns of overthinking, pursuing unavailable people, or feeling anxious about someone's consistency. These setbacks aren't failures. They're normal parts of unlearning survival responses that served a purpose when you were in dysfunction, but don't serve you in healthy relationships. The goal isn't to become perfect or immune to ever being hurt again. The goal is to trust yourself to recognize similar patterns early and respond differently. You want to know what emotional availability looks like, what consistency feels like, and what it means to be with someone who treats your heart with care instead of carelessness. Real recovery means you can think about the relationship without the intense emotional charge that used to come with those memories. You can see it for what it was, a mismatch between your capacity for intimacy and their capacity for intimacy, complicated by patterns that made lasting connection impossible. You can acknowledge what you learned about yourself and relationships without wishing the experience had never happened. Most importantly, you can trust yourself to navigate toward relationships that support your growth instead of relationships that require you to minimize yourself to accommodate someone else's limitations. Recovery doesn't look like never thinking about them again or being completely unaffected by similar situations. It looks like having the internal compass to recognize when someone's behavior doesn't match their words, when your needs aren't being met consistently, and when you're starting to lose yourself trying to make an impossible dynamic work. You'll know you're healing when you can see red flags early instead of making excuses for them, when you can walk away from inconsistency instead of trying to fix it, when you can appreciate people who show up reliably instead of finding them boring, when you can trust your gut feelings about people and situations instead of second-guessing yourself constantly. One crucial aspect of recovery that many people overlook is learning to handle your triggers without letting them control your behavior. When someone reminds you of your avoidant ex, maybe they take a while to respond to texts or seem emotionally reserved, your first instinct might be to either run away or start pursuing them to prove they won't abandon you. Instead, practice sitting with the triggered feeling without acting on it immediately. Tell yourself, I'm feeling triggered because this reminds me of my past experience, but this person is not my ex. Take 3 deep breaths and ask yourself what evidence you actually have about this person's intentions versus what you're assuming based on your trauma. Create a support system of people who understand what you've been through. This doesn't mean constantly talking about your ex, but having friends who can remind you of your worth when you start doubting yourself again. Tell them, if you see me making excuses for someone's bad behavior or accepting inconsistency, please call me out on it. Practice dating or forming new relationships slowly. Don't jump into anything serious until you've had time to observe someone's patterns over several months. Pay attention to how they handle conflict, stress, and your emotional needs. Notice whether their actions match their words consistently over time, not just in the beginning when everyone is on their best behavior. Learn to celebrate small victories in your recovery, when you catch yourself before falling into old patterns, when you set a boundary successfully, when you trust your instincts about someone. Acknowledge these wins. Recovery isn't just about avoiding the bad, it's about recognizing when you're choosing better for yourself. Another crucial part of overcoming avoidant relationship trauma is rebuilding your sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on someone else's validation or consistency. After months of having your worth questioned through someone's inconsistent treatment, you need to actively reconstruct your internal sense of value. Start by making a list of your qualities that have nothing to do with relationships. Include your skills, your interests, your accomplishments, your character traits, your goals. Read this list regularly and add to it when you think of new things. This reminds your brain that you're a complete person with value that exists independently of whether someone can love you consistently. Practice doing things you enjoy without needing to share them with anyone or get approval for them. Take yourself on dates, buy yourself flowers, celebrate your achievements even if no one else notices them. This teaches you to be your own source of positive attention and validation. Set goals that are entirely about you and your growth, not about attracting or keeping someone else. Maybe you want to learn a new skill, travel somewhere specific, change careers, or improve your health. Work toward these goals consistently and notice how good it feels to invest in yourself without any relationship motivation. When you catch yourself seeking validation from others about your appearance, your choices, or your worth, pause and ask yourself, what do I think about this? Practice trusting your own opinion about yourself before seeking external confirmation. It's also important to understand that not every relationship challenge you face in the future will be about your avoidant trauma. Sometimes people will be inconsistent, distant, or emotionally unavailable for reasons that have nothing to do with attachment styles. Sometimes you'll meet people who are going through difficult times, dealing with stress, or just not ready for the kind of relationship you want. Learning to distinguish between someone who's temporarily struggling versus someone who has fundamental patterns that won't change requires time and observation. Give people space to show you who they are through their actions over time, but don't ignore clear patterns because you're afraid of being too sensitive or traumatized. Remember that healing from avoidant relationship trauma doesn't mean you'll never be hurt again, or that you'll become immune to all relationship challenges. It means you'll be able to recognize unhealthy patterns earlier, trust your instincts about people's behavior, and choose relationships that serve your well-being rather than drain it. You'll also develop the ability to communicate your needs clearly without feeling like you're asking for too much. You'll know the difference between someone who struggles with intimacy but is working on it and someone who uses their struggles as an excuse to avoid emotional responsibility. Most importantly, you'll trust yourself enough to walk away from situations that consistently leave you feeling confused, unheard, or emotionally starved. You'll stop trying to earn love from people who've shown you they can't give it consistently, and you'll start recognizing and appreciating love from people who can. The journey of recovery teaches you that your worth isn't determined by someone else's capacity to recognize it. Some people will be able to see and appreciate your value, and others won't. That doesn't change your actual worth. It just gives you information about compatibility and emotional health. The process from trauma to recovery isn't linear, and it's not quick. But it's possible, and it's worth it. You're not just getting over someone. You're reclaiming your ability to recognize and receive the kind of love that doesn't require you to question your worth or manage someone else's emotional limitations. Have you recognized yourself in this recovery process? Share in the comments where you are in your journey and what's been most helpful for your healing. If this helped you understand that avoidant relationship trauma requires specific recovery approaches, like this video and subscribe for more insights about healing from difficult relationship experiences. Thanks for watching.